This is Dr. Robert Leviton, physician informatician, continuing clinical application of worksheets, where we'll be discussing pivot tables and slices. We'll briefly review the Medicare Diabetes Prevention Program or diabetes courses and clinician incentivization. Then we'll learn how to use pivot tables to provide insights to our patients' care and their successful outcomes. We'll look at how we identify blanks in data, inserting a pivot table fields, pivot table features, pivot table analyze, and the very powerful feature of slicers that will give us greater insights to our information and data. And we'll conclude with pivot table printing. CMS has identified that more than 25% of Americans aged 65 and older are affected by diabetes. In 2016, Medicare spent $42 billion more in a single year on beneficiaries with diabetes than it would have spent if those individuals did not have diabetes. Thus, the Medicare Diabetes Prevention Program, or MDPP, was created by CMS to reimburse providers who engage their patients to attend a diabetes self-management program with the goal to achieve a 5% weight loss. An MDD provider is reimbursed from $56 to $689 per patient for the successful completion of the CDC approved coursework as well as achieving the 5% weight loss. You can learn more about these programs using the provided reference links. With 390 diabetic patients in our data tables, and we are able to look at those patients who we can register in the diabetes maintenance program, and then work with them to improve their care and outcomes based upon their ability to stay in the program, complete the coursework, and achieve a 5% weight loss. Let's look at our diabetes follow-up tab. You can see from the tab that we've already done a lot of work in identifying those patients' hemoglobin A1Cs and whether those are well controlled, they have more comorbidities that we need to monitor, they're uncontrolled or poorly controlled. To gain additional insight to this patient population, we're going to use a pivot table that will enable the analysis, performing calculations, and summarizing the data, enabling identification of patterns, trends, and comparisons without using formulas or functions. We first want to begin by making sure that our data table has no missing information. And to do that, we're going to be at the Home tab on the ribbon and come over to the Editing and select Find and Select, go to Special. Within the window that you see here, we're going to select blanks, click OK, and notice how we have a blank at the height field here for medical record 2780. If we scroll down, there's another blank. So we have a blank here at medical record 15757 and another blank at patient medical record 16016. By selecting the filter for heights and deselecting all and coming down to blanks, we've now brought those patients into full view. Fortunately, we reviewed our medical records and we were able to find those heights in the patient's charts, and we're going to add them now. So please do this with me in your worksheet. So you're going to go to medical record 2780 and add 66 inches. And then you're going to go to medical record 15757 and you're going to add 60 inches. And then you're going to go to medical record 16016 and add 78 inches. Let's save the work. And let's remove this table. And now let's demonstrate our entire data set. And here we are back at the beginning with those areas now completed. To create a pivot table, we're going to go to the Insert tab on the ribbon and select the Insert Pivot Table. And so by inserting the pivot table, the first thing we are asked to do is to create that pivot table by selecting a table or a range of data. Let's go to the beginning at the top of the table, and we're going to select medical record number over to weight 1, and then scroll all the way down to the bottom of our table. Remember that we don't want to include the averages. So we have here from B1 to J391, and notice the dollar sign in front of the column and rows in the formula. This indicates that we do not want to adjust the cell reference when copying the formula. We refer to this as the absolute cell reference. Okay, let's click OK, and we're going to create a new worksheet. And here you have our new worksheet, and over on the right you have your pivot tables, and over on the left you have your pivot table that will be built as we drag information from the pivot table fields into the groups. So you notice how we have 4 groups. We have the filters group, rows, columns, and values. Let's begin by dragging each of the areas into these groups. What we're trying to do is learn how many of our patients are located at the two campuses, the Buckingham and Louisa campus, which of those patients are male and female, and what are their medical record numbers so that we can contact them to enroll them in the diabetic management program. We'll begin by selecting patient follow-up and bringing that over to columns. And notice how our pivot table has begun to be constructed with the four groups in our diabetes follow-up. Let's also take the patient follow-up and add it into the sum values here. And now you can see each of those groups have been defined with the values in that group. Let's look at the location and put that row, and their gender in row, and finally the medical record number in row. And now you can see we've created our pivot table. And in that pivot table, we can identify very rapidly the number of patients at Buckingham, of which there are 190, 159 have well controlled, 9 have comorbidities, 4 uncontrolled, and another 18 are poorly controlled. And you can see the breakdown of male and female. And at the same time, you can see what's going on at the Louisa campus. If we select Buckingham and Louisa, now you can see we have a total of 390 patients in our practice, and you can very quickly see which papers fit into which group. For the purpose of the diabetes management program, though, we're not interested in the patients who are well controlled. We want to get those patients who have comorbid states or uncontrolled or poorly controlled. And so we're going to refine this by looking at the column label drop down and removing the well controlled patients. So we have 390 patients in the total group. By removing the well controlled group, we now have 60 patients in the group. So we've automatically updated the display with this information. When creating pivot tables, there are additional tools that are provided to us, and we'd like to look at this pivot table analyze section. Now it's a very interesting section because it gives us things to show. So for example, we can show the field list and we can hide it. So here you have it shown and hidden. Another thing you can do if you're interested, you can grab that and you can bring that sort of floats within your table, or you can bring it back and snap it into the side table. Notice how our buttons, the plus and minus buttons, we have all these expand and collapse buttons. We can hide those and show those. And then we have our field headers, the column labels with the floor labels. We can show those and hide those. So sometimes you may find as you're working, these labels will disappear. If you come to pivot table analyze, you can do the field lists, the hide, the collapse and minus buttons, and then the field headers. Now let's look at another feature here, and this is the insert slicer. Slices are very friendly because it makes it faster and easier to filter the tables and the pivot tables. You can get the slicer from the pivot table analyze, or if you go to insert, you can see that you also have the slicer feature in the insert table. Let's go back to pivot table analyze, and we're going to insert a slicer. Now we're interested in those patients who are 65 years and older and who have a weight greater than 125 pounds. And let's click OK. And now we've added those slicers to our pivot table. We're going to begin by removing those patients who are younger than 65, and so we're going to deselect those, and now we're going to select on multi-select. This is the multi-select icon, and we're going to come down to 65, and we're adding those patients 65 and older. Notice what's happening to the weight table. It's automatically adding those patients with the weights in that age range. And notice we are now left with 17 patients who are 65 years and older who have weights greater than 125 pounds. So we've seen now, with our ages and weights identified, there are 17 patients that are in the potential for joining this program, 11 at the Buckingham campus and 6 at the Louisa campus. Let's take a look at our diabetes follow-up. Now if we go to our diabetes follow-up, you can see that here, again, we have those same 17 patients. So we've removed the well-controlled. We've identified the age range, 65 and older, and we have our weights from 125 and greater. So our pivot table is showing the same 17 records, 17, as our diabetes follow-up. And it's a very powerful tool that you can use to look at your data in greater ways. Now, if we want to contact these patients, we can come over here and select on that. And here we have the medical record numbers notified here. Here's the medical record numbers for everyone in our practice. And you're able to look at that in a way that helps you. Now, by printing this, you come over to File, come over to Print. You have here your pivot table. Notice you have 2 pages. You're really not interested in printing the slicer, so you're just going to limit the page range from 1 to 1 and provide this to your office staff so they can then notify those patients about their interest in joining the program. One last feature. Notice how we have sheet number here. We want to change that sheet to call it pivot table. We want to color that sheet a light blue. So we'll come over here and we'll select the light blue. You're also able to move that sheet to a location in your table by just lifting it and carrying it. So now you see you've got your diabetes registry, your diabetes follow-up, and your pivot table. Well, this concludes our presentation on pivot tables and slices. Be sure to save your work. You've learned here how to insert and identify blanks, inserting the pivot table, about the pivot table fields, filters, columns, rows, and sum values, pivot table features, expanding and collapsing, the print pivot table analyze and slicers, and printing the pivot tables. I'd like you to think about, though, taking a little bit of time and just looking at the CMS Innovation site. These are many additional programs offered by CMS Innovation Center where you'll be able to find the new programs and use the tools and tips that you're acquiring with these spreadsheets. We'll see you next time.